Adjective endings in German can be a source of frustration and confusion. So this video aims to clear up some of those issues by asking a simple question. Is the article or the adjective working hard in what you're trying to say? An article is the word that means the or a, or sometimes an. And in German, you've probably already learned that there's der, die, and das to mean the. One of the first things that you learn about German is that the gender is important. Der is the masculine gender, die is the feminine, and das the neuter. In German, gender is very important, and it's always crucial that we be able to see what the gender is from that article. Now, if you're mainly used to English and having just one word to mean the, then it may be a bit frustrating and confusing at first. But perhaps you've already adapted to the idea that there are three genders for the article of German nouns, and all three of them mean the. So once you've memorized some basic nouns and the genders that go along with them, you may be wanting to describe those things. Something else that may take a little adjusting to is the idea that adjectives, that is, words that describe nouns, get endings that depend on the article that comes before them. So let's say you want to describe this table. You could say, the table is big. And in German, we have the gender of Tisch, which is masculine. Der Tisch ist groß. Groß is the adjective because it describes this thing, this noun, the table. When an adjective comes after the noun, it does not get any kind of ending on the end. But something different happens when the adjective precedes, that is, comes before the noun. So what's different when the adjective comes before the noun? Well, let's see. We could describe this table as rot, this table as groß, this table as modern, this table as billig. When the adjective precedes or comes in front of the noun, it's going to add an E ending when the article shows us the gender clearly. So we would have der große Tisch, der moderne Tisch, der billige Tisch, der rote Tisch. So if the article clearly shows the gender of the noun, the adjective just adds an E. So this is also the case for when we have die, the article in front of the noun, or das, because die shows us the feminine gender and das shows us the neuter gender. So let's try this with some other nouns, and you can work on applying this rule to the adjectives. How about the word the idea in German? That's die Idee. Does die show us the gender clearly? Yes. Die is the feminine article that means the. So it does clearly show us the gender of the noun Idee. So what ending would we need to add to an adjective if we wanted to describe the idea? That's right, an E. So if you want to say the good idea, what would that be in German? The German word for good is gut, and the adjective is preceding, that is, coming before the noun. So to say the good idea in German, die gute Idee. And of course, you wouldn't be capitalizing that E. I'm just doing that for emphasis here. So what if you wanted to tell someone in German, that's a good idea? We're not saying the anymore, we're saying a. And the article for a in German, when you have a feminine noun, is eine. Do you see how both die and eine end in an E? That's enough to tell us that this is a feminine noun we're dealing with. So this article is doing the heavy lifting here. It's showing us the gender. So if the article is showing us the gender and doing the heavy lifting or the hard work here, all we have to do is add an E to the adjective. Das ist eine gute Idee. So if the article is working hard and showing us the gender, der, die, eine, or das, I like to think of it as the default ending for the adjective. Just add an E. So let's say we want to describe this car. You could say the car is blue. You could say that it's small. You could say that it's antique. If we want to say the car is any of these things, das Auto ist blau, klein, antique. But if we want the adjective to come right before the noun and say something like the blue car, then we need to add an ending to our adjectives. Does das show us the gender of Auto? Yes, it shows us that it's neuter. So the adjective ending for the blue car would be das blaue Auto. We're just adding an E on when our article clearly shows us that gender. So let's review once again. If the article shows the gender clearly, the adjective doesn't have to work hard and just adds what I like to call the default ending of E. But what happens if the article doesn't show the gender clearly? Let's look at a few examples, and you can ask yourself, what pattern are you noticing here? What if instead of saying the big table, der große Tisch, we want to say a big table? Then we're using the indefinite article, meaning a or an. And in German, that's ein. Now, can you tell from the word ein, from the article ein, whether the word table, is masculine, feminine, or neuter in German? No. So keep that in mind as you see what happens with the adjective ending. In German, to say a big table, it's ein großer Tisch. How about an antique car? Ein isn't showing us das gender of Auto. So what job is the adjective doing now when our article isn't clearly showing us the gender, der Tisch or das Auto? We can't see that here at all with the ein. So what job is the adjective taking on? Take a pause here and see if you can come up with your own rule about this. So we know it's der Tisch and das Auto, but neither of these articles is showing us that R or S. That would be our clue that this is the masculine gender and that this is the neuter. So the adjective is having to do the heavy lifting. It's having to do all of the hard work here to show us that we would have normally seen with the. So the rule here is that if the article is lazy and doesn't have an ending that shows the noun's gender, or if the article isn't there at all, then the adjective has to do the work of showing the gender. It has to do the heavy lifting of showing that gender in its ending. Der kleine Tisch shows us the gender, so our default ending is E. But ein kleiner Tisch doesn't show us the gender in the article, so we need to add an ER to the adjective. So this rule here is ein plus ER onto the adjective. Similarly, das alte Auto, das shows us the gender, so we add our default E, but ein we can't tell the gender of Auto from, so we have to show the gender with the ES on Auto, on the adjective before Auto. So this rule here is ein plus ES on the adjective. So you can see the relationship between this R and this R and this S, and this S, I hope. So you may be thinking, if gender is so important that the adjective has to show the gender if the article doesn't, why are we leaving out D here? D is the feminine article, and we're not leaving it out. It's just that eine shows us the gender, so we simply add the default ending of E. But here's where D gets a little tricky. D can both be the feminine singular and the plural for a noun of any gender. So the work that the adjective is going to do here is to help us distinguish between the singular and then the plural of any gender. So if it's a singular word, like die idee that we had earlier, and you want to describe that idea more and say the good idea, you simply add your default ending of E, die gute Idee. Or if you want to say a good idea, eine gute Idee. But the tricky part is when we're talking about the plural, which can be the plural of any gender. In the plural, nouns of all genders become die. Der Tisch, die Tische, das Auto, die Autos, die Idee, die Ideen. Of course, you can also see this change to the plural in what happens to the nouns too. Die Tische, die Autos, die Ideen. So to distinguish between the feminine singular and die in the plural, German adjective endings do something as well. So compare the singular and the plural here. Die gute Idee. But the plural, die guten Ideen. So what happened? To make clear that the noun is plural, not feminine singular, the adjective added an en instead of just an e. Let's look at just a few more examples. To show the plural here, to make clear that these die are the plural, not the feminine, the adjective ending is en. Die guten Freunde, the good friends. Die guten Freundinnen, the good friends, female friends. Die schönen Zimmer, the pretty rooms. So the rule here is that to show that the noun is plural, not feminine singular, the adjective does the heavy lifting and adds an en ending. There are just a few other times when adjectives add an en ending. In the accusative masculine, and I like to think of this as keeping the good times rolling with the en, or as what I call the rhyming rule. So, let me give you an example. Ich sehe einen großen Tisch. Who's doing the seeing? I am. I'm the subject. And then the object that I'm seeing is einen großen Tisch. You may already know that you need to add en for a masculine object, or something that's in the accusative case. And then you just keep the good times rolling, or practice what I call the rhyming rule, by adding on an en to any adjective there. In this sense, German is much more melodic than people give it credit for. The other time you want to use an en ending on your adjective is for the dative and the genitive. These are always en. I saved the best news for last here. It's such a relief you don't have to think about gender here at all. Just add en on to any adjectives that you have when you're in the dative or genitive cases. I'll give you some examples. The preposition mit is always followed by the dative case, and so here we have mit meinen Freunden. If we want to describe those friends by saying they're my good friends, we can use the adjective gut and simply add an en ending on. So with the dative case, you always use en for adjective endings. This is also true for the genitive case. Wegen is a genitive preposition. Wegen des Wetters, because of the weather. If you want to say because of the bad weather and add in an adjective, that adjective simply gets an en ending. So for the genitive case, also use en for any adjectives. Hopefully this video has taken some of the heavy lifting out of adjective endings for you. So until these adjective endings become second nature from repeated practice, remember to ask yourself, is the article or the adjective doing the heavy lifting of showing the noun's gender? If the article is doing its job and showing the gender, just add E. You add en to the adjective when it's the accusative masculine ending, keeping those good times rolling with en, and in the dative and genitive, regardless of the gender of the noun. But remember, gender is so important in German that if the article is not doing the heavy lifting, the adjective must. That means the adjective has to show those genders in the endings by adding er for masculine nouns and es for neuter nouns. If the article has an e, it's not clearly showing whether it is feminine, singular, or the plural. So your adjective must add an en for the plural to differentiate it from the singular feminine.